Now there's potentially a number of reasons why sort of businesses might want to kind of have a remote workforce, but particularly what we're looking at today is about sort of global workforces, and sort of in that context there's a number of reasons why it might be attractive, potentially accessing a much wider talent pool, being able to sort of build a presence in a different jurisdiction where you might be interested in marketing, and sort of potentially being able to operate in different time zones as well. So a number of sort of potential benefits for kind of looking at having a global workforce. Now I know within the games team, India, you've done quite a lot of work in this area. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've been seeing?
Yeah, sure. So we've seen a definite rise in interest from our clients about hiring staff abroad. I think that's in part because of the skilled labour shortages post-Brexit, but also because of the rise in remote working post-pandemic. So all these new service models are popping up and our clients are asking us about the legality of these operations and whether or not those businesses are suitable for them. So I guess, can you tell us about some of the risks that we see when hiring staff abroad?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I don't want to be all doom and gloom about this by any means, because I think what we try and do at Wigan is sort of provide solutions for people, but this is a risky area, there's no doubt. I think probably the first thing that you need to think about when you're employing or engaging someone overseas is what sort of rights considerations you might have. So usually when someone starts to render services in a particular jurisdiction, the employment rights of that jurisdiction will apply from day one. Not always, but potentially that's the case, and so it's quite important to get that local advice to sort of assess that properly. You've then got to think about tax and social security contributions. So if you're hiring someone natively overseas, then they're likely going to be a tax resident of that particular country, and so you need to make sure that you're operating the appropriate payroll taxes if they're an employee. If you're engaging them as a contractor, then you might have slightly different considerations, but again, you really need to be thinking those things through and getting appropriate advice. Now you might have some other considerations, such as sort of data protection considerations. So if you're sort of engaging someone overseas and there's sort of data being passed between the UK and someone who's working in a different country, then you might need to think through sort of any GDPR implications and sort of whether there's sort of a safe and secure transfer of that data. And then one of the other things that we've seen a number of clients look at is actually, rather than hiring someone natively in a particular country, is actually their UK staff moving abroad and working overseas. And that was particularly popular during COVID. So in that context, you've probably got immigration considerations to think through as well. So has that person actually got the right to go and work in that particular country? And then finally, you've got this sort of plethora of sort of HR considerations just with managing someone who's not actually in your country. So it's kind of what considerations might you have around things like health and safety or just general productivity. So it is a bit of a minefield, but obviously you can navigate all of these with the appropriate advice. So from the games industry's perspective, is there anything that's been specifically tricky that you've seen?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, there's a whole host of legal and regulatory compliance, and I think with the games industry, there's so many rules and regulations that are specific to games. Navigating all of that together for employers is really tricky. I guess also intellectual property, so IP is really important for the games industry. It's critical that it's protected, and making sure that IP rights flow from any staff that's contracted back to the client's really important. And a third point would be talent acquisition. So the games industry is a really competitive industry, and it's important to keep in mind what talent would want when you're picking a service provider. So an employer of record service, for example, might not be ideal where staff wants to work directly with a company. So what options are there available for this, Seth?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few options to think through. I suppose at the base level, you've got to think about, are you actually employing someone, or are you engaging them as a contractor? I obviously have those considerations in the UK as well, but you need to think about how they might apply in a different jurisdiction where the rules might be different. So that's the first thing to think through. Second thing, probably after that, is do you engage that person directly, or do you set up a subsidiary or entity in that particular jurisdiction? There's potentially pros and cons with each of those options, but you may find that in some jurisdictions you actually need an entity to actually engage the individuals, so that actually might dictate which particular option you go for there. And then the third option, and you've touched on it already, India, is sort of a different style of employment model, so sort of an employer of record service. And there's some other services that are similar to that, where effectively you've got an entity that sort of carries out the employment for you. So I know within the games team, you've actually come across sort of employer of record services quite a lot. Can you tell us a little bit more about those, India?
Yeah, definitely. So employer of record models is probably the most popular model that arises with our games clients. We've also seen other service models like setting up a local entity, as you say, or services where they will help our client establish themselves as an employer in various European territories. But employer of record services are generally used when the client doesn't want to go through all the admin of setting up a local entity. So the employer of record will be the employer. They'll be the ones contracting directly with the staff. They'll manage things like HR and payroll and local compliance, but our clients will still be the ones that manage the day-to-day services. So we know these businesses are out there and the games industry is utilising them, but are there any risks?
Yeah, well, I think I'm probably guilty of probably be looking like a bit of a harbinger of doom, unfortunately, in this video, but I do think you need to be quite careful with these models. I think the problem is that you, as a business, probably contract with someone like this because you're wanting to de-risk the engagement or the employment. And I think that the reality is that when you look at the small print of a lot of these services, a lot of the liability is being pushed back onto you as the client. So you might think, oh, well, we're not actually taking on the employment risk for these individuals or the taxation risk. But actually, when you look at the contracts, you are. And also, a lot of these businesses are fairly new. Not all of them are that sophisticated. So you need to be quite careful about how you negotiate with them, and don't always assume you have to take their terms. So yeah, yes, there are some risks. I mean, you do need to be thinking about sort of how you're managing these engagements in the right way. There's IP considerations as well, aren't there, India?
Yeah, so there are chain of title issues. In a traditional employment relationship, the rights are going to flow from the employee to the employer. But when you have a third-party service introduced, you need to make sure that the IP rights flow from the staff through to that third-party service and then to the client. So how should clients navigate this?
Well, I think that's a really good question. I mean, I think, as we've alluded to already, getting appropriate local advice is absolutely crucial. Now, some businesses may feel that that's just not worth it, it's not commercial to do that for sort of a one-off engagement, but I think if you've got more than one person being engaged in a particular jurisdiction, then it's always going to be worth getting that advice, and I'd suggest getting both employment law advice and tax advice. Now, we can actually do a lot of work sourcing that advice with local council, so we've got a lot of sort of best friend firms that we work with in pretty much any jurisdiction in the world. So we do a lot of that, and actually I think we can add quite a lot of value to clients by managing that advice, by repackaging it in a way which we know our clients sort of like to see their advice. So that's something that we do quite a lot. I suppose the other thing I would say is that I would never discount actually just hiring directly or setting up a local entity within a particular jurisdiction. That, for me, sort of seems less risky than going down the employer of record route, although there will be cases where the employer of record solution works well, but I'd never discount that sort of direct engagement or sort of setting up a local entity. So based on your recent experience, what advice would you give to sort of games and interactive entertainment businesses on navigating these problems?
Yes, I mean, along with everything that you said, we just always recommend that any service agreements are just checked as closely as possible. We've seen a lot of high-risk areas pop up, things like really broad indemnities over an employer of record or any subcontractors, for example, or like very low liability caps, or just the IP rights not flowing back properly. And we both know from experience that these terms are all negotiable, so it's really important that these terms are properly scrutinised to ensure the best possible outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for joining me today, India, and I hope that video was informative. Now, there's a lot more information about sort of these sorts of employment models and also our interactive entertainment team in particular on the Wigan website, so please do check that out. And also, obviously, if you've got any questions for me and India about anything we've talked about today, then please let us know.